Leave first class right now!
This ticket says seat 2A.
Security will remove you now!
You're moving the wrong man.
His boarding pass is valid. Julian Carter owns this airline. I did not know, sir. Respect should not require my title.
Sir, this seat is not yours. I need you to move to the economy cabin now. The words carried through the first-class cabin with enough force to stop every conversation. A glass of champagne hovered near a passenger's lips, a newspaper lowered. Somewhere behind the second row, a phone camera began recording. Julian Carter looked up from his tablet. He was seated beside the window in seat 2A, exactly where his boarding pass said he belonged. He wore a dark charcoal jacket, plain blue jeans, and brown leather shoes polished many times but clearly not new. His carry-on fit neatly beneath the seat in front of him. Nothing about him demanded attention. That was the point. Melissa Grant stood in the aisle with a company tablet pressed against her hip. She was 39, experienced and known among junior crew members for running a tight cabin. Her hair was pinned into a smooth bun. Her smile looked professional from a distance. Up close, it looked cold. "Excuse me," Julian asked. His voice was quiet, just controlled. Melissa glanced toward the economy cabin behind him, then back at his face. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers," she said. Economy boarding continues toward the rear. A few people shifted in their seats, not because he was confused. Julian studied her for a moment. Because he recognized the pattern. The quick look at his clothes. The pause before believing him. The silent conclusion reached before a single fact had been checked. He had experienced it in hotel lobbies, private clubs, executive restaurants, executive offices. A man could spend decades building something and still be reduced to a stranger's first impression in less than 3 seconds. Julian placed his tablet on the tray table. "My boarding pass says 2A. Melissa's eyes flicked toward the illuminated seat number above him. For half a second, uncertainty crossed her face. Then it disappeared. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Julian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to her. Melissa accepted it with 2 fingers. She studied the printed pass longer than necessary. Her eyes moved from his name to the seat number, then to the boarding group. She tapped her tablet and scrolled through the passenger list. Julian watched her jaw tighten. The answer was there. She simply did not like it. Behind Melissa, a younger flight attendant named Brandon Cole leaned against the galley wall. He was 30, broad-shouldered, and still carried the confidence of someone who had never been forced to question his own instincts. He looked at Julian, then at Melissa. Julian noticed a small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Julian noticed there may have been a system error. "The pass scanned at the gate," Julian replied. "Yes, but mistakes do happen." She handed the pass back, though her fingers held it for an extra second. Julian took it without pulling, then checked with the gate agent. Melissa's smile tightened. "Sir, sometimes passengers become confused during boarding." "Passengers." The word sounded harmless. It was not. Julian felt something old settle behind his ribs. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. He remembered his father standing at a hardware store counter in Detroit, receipt in hand, while a cashier questioned whether the credit card belonged to him. He remembered the way his father had stayed calm, the way he had stood straight, the way he had refused to become the version of himself they expected. Later, his father had told him, dignity does mean staying silent. It means choosing your words before someone else chooses your story. Julian had carried that lesson for 30 years. Now, in the polished quiet of a first-class cabin, he needed again. "My name is Julian Carter," he said. "I booked this seat 3 weeks ago. I paid for it. I boarded correctly. There is no confusion." Melissa looked around the cabin. Several passengers were watching openly now. A silver-haired man across the aisle raised his eyebrows as if Julian's calm explanation had somehow become an inconvenience. A woman in the row behind him lifted her phone slightly, pretending to check a message. Not less. That made her more rigid. Not less. She straightened her shoulders. "Sir, I am trying to resolve this without delaying the flight." Julian looked toward the open aircraft door. Boarding was still underway. Passengers continued moving through the aisle. No announcement had been made, no departure time had been affected. You approached me, he said. I was sitting quietly. Brandon let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Melissa turned slightly toward him. He shrugged. The gesture was small, but Julian understood it. They had already decided what kind of man he was. Difficult, suspicious, out of place. Melissa lowered her voice, but not enough to keep the first 3 rows from hearing. I am going enough to keep the first 3 your belongings. Julian, to ask you to gather your slightly. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. For what reason? We need to verify your seating assignment. You already verified it. Melissa's fingers tightened around the tablet. Sir, please do not make this harder than it needs to be. The cabin grew still with os arderus. They were often spoken when the person with authority and he wanted obedience without accountability. They made resistance sound dangerous. They made surrender sound reasonable. Julian looked down at the boarding pass in his hand. Seat 2A, first class, confirmed, paid. Then his phone lit up on the sky table, a message preview, the airport's operations manager. Leadership file updated. Board briefing confirmed for noon. Melissa did not notice it. Neither did Brandon. Neither knew that the quiet man they were preparing to remove was not merely a passenger. Julian Carter was the chief executive officer of Horizon Crest Airlines. He owned more voting power in the company than any other individual. He had boarded without an assistant, without security, and without notifying the crew, because he wanted to see how ordinary passengers were treated when no one important appeared to be watching. Now he had his answer. Julian placed the port pass carefully on the armrest. Then he looked directly into Melissa's eyes. I am not leaving this seat. Melissa's expression hardened. Brandon pushed away from the galley wall, and somewhere behind them the phone camera moved higher. Melissa held Julian's gaze for a moment and turned toward. Get the passenger list. Brandon stepped into the galley and returned with a tablet in his hand. His earlier smirk had faded, but not because he doubted Melissa. Since Lee's understood that the room was watching now. Melissa shifted closer to Julian's seat. There appears to be a seating adjustment, she said. Julian looked at the empty aisle beside her. For whom? Before she could answer, a man's voice came from the front of the cabin. For me. Charles Whitmore stood near the galley with one hand resting on the handle of a black leather briefcase. He was 63, tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a camel-colored coat over an expensive gray suit. His wife, Evelyn, stood behind him, holding a cream handbag against her chest. Charles looked at seat 2A, then at Julian. Not at his boarding pass. Not at the seat number. At Julian. I usually sit there, Charles said. The sentence was delivered like a fact that should have settled everything. Julian remained seated. Usually is not the same as assigned. Charles blinked. He was not accustomed to being corrected in public, especially not in a place where crew members knew his name before he introduced himself. Melissa turned toward Charles, and her entire face changed. The tension left her mouth. Her voice softened. Mr. Whitmore, I'm working to resolve this. Evelyn glanced toward Julian with a tired frown. We paid for premium service, she said. We should not have to stand in the aisle while someone argues. Julian looked at her. I am not arguing. I am sitting in the seat printed on my boarding pass. Evelyn pressed lips together. Melissa tapped the screen in Brandon's hand. Mr. Whitmore is one of our most valued platinum members, she said. He flies this route frequently. Julian gave a small nod. That may earn him courtesy. It does not give him my seat. A soft murmur moved through the cabin. Charles stepped closer. I have been sitting in 2A on this route for years. His voice remained polished, but irritation sharpened every word. The crew knows my preferences. Julian could hear the difference. Charles spoke about preference as though it had become ownership through repetition. Melissa seemed to believe the same thing. So did Brandon, who stood with his arms folded near the galley curtain. Julian looked at Melissa. What seat is Mr. Whitmore assigned? She hesitated. That hesitation told the cabin more than an answer would have. Brandon glanced into the tablet. 2C, he said. Charles turned sharply toward him. Melissa's face tightened. Brandon, he looked up, realizing too late that he had said the quiet part out loud. Julian leaned back slightly. So there is no seating error. Melissa drew in a slow breath. We are trying to accommodate a loyal customer, and I am not a customer? That is not what I said. No. Julian replied. It is what you are doing. The woman behind him raised her phone a little higher. Her name was Hannah Reed. She was 36, a retired elementary school counselor traveling to visit her sister in California. She had spent most of her career watching children learn how power worked, who was believed, who was punished, who was expected to apologize. First, she had seen adults repeat the same lessons. Her hand trembled as she recorded. Melissa noticed the phone. "Mom, please do not film crew members during an active service issue." Hannah kept the phone steady. I am sitting quietly in my seat. The words echoed Julian's own. Melissa stared at her, then turned back to Julian. "We can offer you another seat. Where?" "There is an exit row in economy with additional legroom." For the first time, Julian's expression changed. Not much, just a slight tightening around the eyes. "You are asking me to leave first class, for giving my seat to a man who prefers it." Charles exhaled loudly. "This is becoming ridiculous." Julian's turned toward him. "It became ridiculous when everyone decided your preference mattered more than my ticket." Evelyn touched her husband's sleeve. "Charles, maybe we should just sit down." He pulled his arm away. "No. This should have been handled before boarding." Melissa looked at Julian again. The cabin lights reflected against the small gold wings pinned above her name tag. For years, she had believed authority meant preventing disruption, keeping order, moving people along. She had never stopped to ask who was always being asked to move. "Mr. Carter," she said, reading his name from the boarding pass, "I need your cooperation." Julian's voice stayed low. "You have my cooperation with every lawful safety instruction. This is not one." Brandon stepped forward. "Come on, man. It is just a seat." "That's it." Julian, "Look, then Mr. Whitmore can sit in his." The words Landon's jaw tightened. "You are making people uncomfortable." Julian slowly looked around the cabin. A woman held her champagne glass with both hands. A man in a navy blazer stared down at his newspaper without reading it. Hannah kept filming. Charles stood red-faced in the aisle. "Who is uncomfortable?" Julian asked. "The people watching me being pushed out of a seat I paid for? Or the people upset that I will not make this easy?" No one answered. The silence carried its own answer. Melissa's fingers moved toward the radio clipped near her shoulder. Julian saw it. So did Hannah. Melissa paused for 1 second. It was the last moment when she could have stepped back, checked the record, corrected the mistake, protected the dignity of everyone involved. Instead, she pressed the button. "Security to the aircraft door," she said. "We have a non-compliant passenger in first class." A gasp came from somewhere behind Julian. Hannah whispered, "Oh no." Brandon straightened as if the call had restored control. Charles gave a faint nod. Julian stayed still. His phone buzzed once on the tray table. A message from Amanda Collins appeared on the screen. "Passengers' complaint videos received. Legal team notified. Awaiting your instruction." Julian turned the phone face down. He had not revealed who he was. Not yet. Because this was no longer only about him. It was about what people did when they believed the person in front of them had no power at all. The word security moved through the cabin faster than Melissa's voice. Heads turned, phones rose. Conversations died in the middle of sentences. Julian remained in seat 2 with both hands resting on the armrests. His posture did not change, but moment inside him tightened. He knew what happened when a simple disagreement was recast as a security issue. The facts became secondary. The uniform became the stories. Melissa lowered the radio from her shoulder. "You still have time to handle this appropriately," she said. Julian looked up at her. "I have handled it appropriately from the beginning." Brandon stepped closer until he stood beside her. Together, they formed a wall in the aisle. "You are delaying the flight," he said. "No," Julian replied. "You are." The sentence struck harder than Brandon expected. His face changed. His eyes flicked toward the passengers, searching. Charles gave him a small nod. "That was enough. Look," Charles said, raising his voice with the calm confidence of a man used to being heard. "Some of us have connections to make. Maybe this gentleman could cooperate now and file a complaint later." Julian turned toward him. Charles had chosen the word gentleman carefully. It allowed him to sound polite while supporting something deeply unfair. Julian had heard that kind of language before. Respectful on the surface, empty underneath. Hannah lowered her phone for half a second. "He has a valid ticket," she said. The cabin went still again. "Mom, please, remain seated and do not interfere. I am seated." Hannah's cheeks flushed, but her voice stayed steady, and I saw his boarding pass. A murmur passed through first class. It was small, uneasy, human. The man with the newspaper looked up fully now. The woman holding champagne placed the glass on her tray table. An older couple in the third row exchanged a troubled glance. Melissa felt control slipping. That frightened her more than the actual facts. She had built her professional identity around keeping order. Passengers listened. Junior crew followed her lead. Problems were contained before they became public. But now the room was watching her judgment, not Julian's behavior. She tightened her grip on the tablet. "This is a crew matter," she said. Hannah did not look away. No, it became everyone's concern when you called security on a man for sitting in the seat on his ticket. Brandon shifted his, "Wait, Mom, you do not know the full situation." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. There was no explanation that sounded reasonable once spoken plainly. Julian felt a quiet ache in his chest, not because he needed Hannah to defend him. He had spent most of his life learning not to depend on strangers for fairness. But being seen still mattered. It did not erase humiliation. It did not fix the system. Still, it reminded him that silence was not the only possible response. Melissa stepped closer to Julian. "Mr. Carter, I am giving you one final opportunity to relocate voluntarily." Julian looked at armrest. "What happens if I refuse? You may be removed from the aircraft seat. For refusing a crew instruction, that is not the same thing, so..." Melissa's chin lifted. "Crew instructions are not optional." "Safety's instructions are not optional," Julian said. "This is a seating preference." Charles let out an impatient breath. "You are playing with words," Julian met his eyes. "No, I am separating authority from convenience." That sentence silenced Charles. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Etzlin's face. She looked at her husband, then at Julian, then at Melissa. A faint crease formed between her eyebrows. She had entered the cabin, believing there was a simple mistake. A seat mix-up. A small inconvenience that should be resolved in favor of her husband because that was how things usually worked. Now she could see the pattern taking shape. One man had a ticket, the other had a preference, yet only one was being threatened. Evelyn lowered her voice. "Charles, maybe we should take our assigned seats." He turned toward her. "Not now." The sharpness in his tone made her flinch. Julian noticed. So did Hannah's camera. Then heavy footsteps sounded on the jet bridge. Slow, measured, official. The cabin door remained open, but the air changed before anyone appeared. Melissa straightened her uniform. Brandon moved half a step back. Charles adjusted his cuffs. Julian stayed seated. A uniformed airport security officer entered the aircraft. She was in her early 40s with tired eyes and a calm expression shaped by years of airport disputes. Her name tag read Rebecca Hayes. She stopped at the front of the cabin and took in the scene. Melissa in the eyed her. Charles standing nearby. Julian seated, at least 5 phones recording. Rebecca's gaze moved from face to face. Her hand rested near her utility belt, not on her weapon, but close enough to remind everyone that the situation had changed. "What is going on?" she asked. Melissa spoke first. "This passenger is refusing crew instructions. He is seated in first class without proper clearance, and he will not relocate." Julian looked at Rebecca. "That is not true." Melissa snapped it toward him. "Sir, do not interrupt." Rebecca raised one hand. Everyone take breath. For 1 second, the cabin obeyed. The air vent above Julian hissed softly. A baggage cart beeped outside the window. Somewhere farther back, a child began to cry. Somewhere farther back, toward the tie. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass and identification?" Julian handed them over without hesitation. Rebecca examined the boarding pass first, then the driver's license, then the seat marker above Julian's shoulder. 2A, her brow tightened. She looked at Melissa. "This ticket appears valid." Melissa's face changed, only slightly, but everyone saw it. "It may appear valid," she said, "but we have a premium guest who is supposed to have this seat." Rebecca held her gaze. "Supposed to?" The word landed like a hammer. Charles looked down. Brandon swallowed. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed. Rebecca looked at the boarding pass again. "Is Mr. Carter listed in 2A on the manifest?" Melissa gripped the tablet harder. "There may be accommodations." "That is not what I asked." The cabin seemed to shrink on them. Melissa tapped the screen, once, twice again. The silence grew heavier with every second. Then she stopped. her shoulders lowered by a fraction. It shows him in 2A, she said. No one moved. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. But Julian knew truth alone did not end harm, not when Prize still standing in the aisle. Captain Robert Hayes stepped out of the cockpit just as Melissa lowered the tablet. He was 55, broad through the shoulders, with gray at his temples, and the controlled expression of a man used to being obeyed. His uniform was crisp. His gold stripes caught the cabin light as he moved down the aisle. He saw Rebecca holding Julian's boarding pass. He saw Melissa standing rigid. He saw Charles near the galley, red-faced and impatient. Then he looked at Julian, not at the documents, at Julian. "What is going on here?" Robert asked. Melissa answered before anyone else could speak. "This passenger has refused multiple crew instructions. We have a seating conflict with a premium customer, and he has become non-compliant." Julian felt the pattern close around him again. Complaint first, context later. Label first. Person later, Rebecca turned slightly toward the captain. "His ticket is valid. He is assigned to 2A. Robert's eyes moved to the boarding pass in her hand, then to the seat marker above Julian 2A. He did not respond immediately. Departure time was approaching. The aircraft door was still open. Ground operations would already be watching the clock. Every minute could affect the gate schedule, the pushback slot, the crew duty window. Robert had spent years learning to control risk. But risk had a way of becoming a blindfold when people cared more about delay than truth. He looked at Julian. "Mr. Carter, I need you to help us resolve this situation." Julian's voice remained even. "I have been trying to resolve it since she first decided I did not belong here." Melissa's head turned sharply. "That is not what happened." "It is what happened." Melissa looked toward her. "Mom, this is your final warning. Stop interfering." Robert raised one hand. "Enough." The cabin froze. His voice was not loud, tight, but the hard edge of his band. He took the boarding pass from Rebecca and examined it. Julian watched his eyes move across the printed name, flight number, and seat assignment. There was handed the pass, no missing detail. Robert handed the pass back to Rebecca. "Melissa, does the passenger manifest show Mr. Carter to assign to this seat?" Melissa swallowed. "Yes, Captain." A breath moved through the cabin. Small, sharp, relieved, but Melissa continued. "There is also a premium accommodation note for Mr. Whitmore." Robert turned toward her. "What does the note say?" Melissa looked down at the tablet. "It says the crew should make reasonable efforts to accommodate his preferred seating when available." Julian looked at Charles. "When available." Charles shifted his briefcase to his other hand. Robert's jaw tightened. "Mr. Whitmore, what seat are you assigned?" Charles straightened. 2C. "But I have flown this route for years. The crew knows I always sit by the window." That was not the question. Charles stared at her. Robert exhaled slowly. He was beginning to see the situation clearly now. But clarity came with consequences. He corrected Melissa in front of the cabin. He weakened his crew. If he supported her, he ignored the evidence. He wanted a middle path, a quick solutions, the kind that often asked the wronged person to sacrifice, because everyone else was already invested in the mistake. "Mr. Carter," Robert said carefully, "we can offer you another first-class seat. You would receive the same service, and the airline can provide additional compensation." Julian looked across the aisle. 2C was visible, clean, empty, assigned to Charles. "Then Mr. Whitmore can sit there." Charles's face hardened. "That is not acceptable." Julian turned toward him. "Why?" Charles seemed surprised by the question. "Because I prefer this seat, and I paid for it." Charles opened his mouth, but no answer came. Robert looked at Melissa. She was pale now, though her posture remained stiff. Brandon stood behind her, staring at the floor. The captain lowered his voice. "Mr. Carter, we are trying to avoid further disruption." Julian leaned back slightly. "Disruption did not begin when I refused to move. It began when your crew decided one passenger's preference mattered more than another passenger's rights." Robert's expression tightened. He was not an unkind man. That was what made the moment harder. Cruelty was easy to recognize when it shouted. More dangerous was the decent person who chose the familiar side without asking enough questions. Hannah understood that. She had seen it in schools for years. Good people could participate in unfair systems while still believing they were being reasonable. She spoke again. "Captain, he has not raised his voice once." Robert glanced toward her. Hannah continued. He showed his ticket. He answered every question. Security confirmed the seat. Why is he still the one being asked to compromise? The cabin waited. Robert did not answer. Julian felt something ache beneath his anger. This was bigger than one bad employee, bigger than Charles, bigger than one seat. It was about how quickly authority protected itself, how often past purchased with someone else's dignity, how easily fairness seemed negotiable. Each and being harmed seemed powerless. Julian looked at Robert. When a company forgets that people are people before they are status levels, seat numbers, or assumptions, it does not just lose customers. He paused. The cabin was silent enough to hear the engines humming outside. It loses its soul. No one spoke. Melissa's eyes dropped. Charles looked away. Robert held Julian's gaze. Then the radio on his shoulder crackled. Captain Hayes Operations is requesting immediate contact. Priority call from headquarters. Robert reached for the radio. Hayes here. A low voice answered through the static. Captain, are you currently dealing with a passenger named Julian Carter in seat 2A? Robert's eyes moved toward Julian. Yes. There was a pause. A long one. Then, the voice returned. Do not remove him from the aircraft. Robert went still. Melissa watched his face. Brandon stopped breathing. Julian remained seated. The voice continued. Airport management is on the way. Corporate legal action until they notified. Take no further action until they arrive. Robert lowered the radio slowly. The authority in the cabin had shifted. No one knew exactly why, but everyone felt it. Robert kept the radio in his hand, but the order from headquarters had already. He shimmed quieter now. Step back. She stared at him. Captain, step back from the passenger. This time, there was no room for interpretation. Melissa moved one pace away from Julian's row. The color in her face shifted from red to pale. Brandon followed without being told. His eyes dropped to the carpet. Charles remained in the aisle. I hope we are not letting this get out of, he said. Rebecca turned toward him. Sir, please return to your assigned seat. My assigned seat? Yes, sir. 2C. The words struck him harder than they should have. For years, preference had become routine. Routine had become expectation. Expectation had become something close to ownership. No one had challenged it because everyone around him had found it easier to bend. Evelyn touched his arm. Charles, please. He looked around the cabin and realized every phone was pointed in his direction now. He sat down, not willingly, not quietly. But he sat. Julian went into A. He should have felt relief, the kind of tired that settled deeper than the body. He had spent years in boardrooms, negotiations, and public hearings. He had signed contracts that moved thousands of employees and millions of dollars. He knew power. He knew influence. Yet none of it had protected him from being reduced to suspicion by people who knew nothing about him. That was the wound.
Not the delay.
Being unseen. Robert stepped closer, though he kept a respectful distance now. Mr. Carter, I have confusion. We are reviewing the situation. Julian looked at him. With respect, Captain, you are not reviewing the situation. Robert's brow tightened. You are reviewing your exposure. The words were calm. That made them heavier. Robert held his gaze. For the first time, fear was replaced by something else. Shame. Not the shallow shame of being caught, the deeper kind. The kind that came when a decent person realized he had trusted the wrong version of events because it was easier. Melissa crossed her arms. That is unfair, she said. We were following procedure. Julian turned toward her. No. His voice was low. You had a seating assumption. Her mouth tightened. I had a seating concern. You had a valid boarding pass. There was a note in the system. There was a preference in the system. Melissa looked toward Robert for help. He did not give it. Rebecca returned Julian's license and boarding pass. Mr. Carter, you are legally seated where you belong. Julian accepted the documents. Thank you, Officer Hayes. Rebecca nodded once. The simple courtesy unsettled her more than anger would have. She had entered the aircraft expecting another routine conflict, a passenger against a crew, a delay to solve, a report to complete. Now she saw something larger. A man had been forced to defend his right to sit quiet place he had already paid to occupy, and he was still treating everyone around him with more dignity than they had offered him. Fast footsteps sounded on the jet bridge. A woman appeared at the aircraft door wearing a navy suit and a company identification badge clipped near her collar. She was breathing hard, as if she had run from the terminal office. Amanda saw called airport operations manager. She looked down the aisle until she found Julian. Then she stopped, her face drained of color. Melissa saw it. So did Robert. Amanda knew Julian from confidential leadership meetings, company reports, and official photographs that were never shown to frontline staff. She had spoken to him twice in person. Both times he had remembered her name. Now he sat in seat 2A with 5 phones recording and his boarding pass resting in his hand. Amanda walked toward him carefully. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I am so sorry." Melissa's eyes widened. Brandon looked up. Charles leaned forward from 2C. "Mr. Carter," he repeated. Amanda glanced at the passengers, then at the crew. She understood there was no private way to handle this now. The truth had all she entered the room. "This is Julian Carter," she said, Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Crest Airlines. For 1 second, nothing moved. Then everything changed. Melissa's lips parted. No sound came out. Brandon stared at Julian as if seeing a different man. Robert lowered his radio. Charles whispered. The CEO, Evelyn, closed her eyes. She understood before her husband did. The room had not changed because Julian had changed. It had changed because everyone else finally learned how much power he carried. Hannah kept recording. Her hand no longer trembled. Amanda stepped closer. "Headquarters notified me as soon as the video reached legal. I came directly to the gate." Julian looked at her. "Were you sent because a passenger was being mistreated?" Amanda hesitated. The answer was written across her face. Julian waited. "Or because someone recognized my name?" The cabin went quiet again. Amanda lowered her eyes. "Because they recognized your name." The honesty hurt more than an excuse would have. Julian nodded, slowly. "That is the problem." No one argued. Melissa gripped the edge of her tablet. "Mr. Carter, I did not know who you were." Julian turned toward her. His expression was not cruel. That made it harder. "You did not need to know who I was." Melissa blinked. "You only needed to know I was a person with a valid ticket." Her face tightened as she fought to hold the professional mask in place. "I thought there was a mistake. You made one." The sentence was soft, sharp, final. Brandon took a small step back. Julian noticed. "And he said. Brandon swallowed. "You laughed before anyone checked the facts. I was supporting my coworker." "No," Julian replied. "You were supporting her assumption." The words settled over him. For the first time, Brandon looked young, not innocent. Just young enough to realize that habits learned from others could still become his responsibility. Rebecca shifted beside the aisle. "Mr. Carter, would you like this handled here or at the gate?" Julian looked around the cabin, at the phones, at the people who had watched. Some looked ashamed, some defensive, some relieved that they had not been the target. Then he looked at Hannah. She lowered her phone slightly. "I am sorry," she said. "I should have spoken sooner." Julian's expression softened. "Spoke. You spoke." He paused. "That matters." Hannah nodded, her eyes wet. It did not erase what had happened. Nothing could. But in that small exchange, something human returned to the cabin. A reminder that justice did not always begin with power. Sometimes it began with one ordinary person deciding not to look away. Captain Robert Hayes cleared his throat, but the sound did little to break the silence. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I take responsibility for not slowing this down sooner." Julian turned toward him. Robert's face had changed. The command was still there, but the certainty was gone, Captain, Julian said. "Authority matters on an aircraft, I understand that." Robert nodded once. "Safety depends on it," Julian continued. "But authority without judgment becomes force, and force without fairness becomes harm." The words settled into the cabin. Robert absorbed them without defending himself. Yes, shift in 2C. His face was still red, but his confidence had weakened. "I think this has become much bigger than it needed to be," he said. Julian looked at him. "It became bigger when my right to sit than your preference." Charles tightened his jaw. "There was a misunderstanding." "No." Julian's voice remained calm. "There was an understanding." Everyone understood exactly who was expected to move. Charles had no answer. Evelyn looked down at her handbag. Her fingers moved across the lesser strip in a slow, nervous rhythm. "I am sorry," she said. The words were barely above a whisper. Julian studied her face. The apology was late. It was small, false. He nodded once. Amanda's phone buzzed in her hand. She checked the screen and looked toward Julian. "Headquarters is asking for direction." Julian picked up his own phone from the tray table. The screen showed 6 missed calls from Sophia Bennett, his chief of staff, 3 messages from legal, 2 from the board chair. He pressed so. She answered immediately. I am here. Her voice was controlled, but Julian could hear movement behind it. Doors opening, people speaking, a call an emergency, a board meeting, Julian said. So Melissa closed her eyes. Brandon stared at the floor. Brandon's floor. Robert lowered his head. Sophia did not hesitate. Who do you want included? Board chair, general counsel, operations, human resources, communications. Julian looked around the cabin and preserve every recording connected to this incident. Understood. Do not contact passengers and ask them to remove anything. Amanda glanced at him. Julian continued. No pressure, no threats, no legal language designed to frighten witnesses. Hannah's phone remained in her lap now, still recording. Sophia paused. Do you want the flight held? Julian looked toward the open aircraft door. Beyond it, the jet bridge lights glowed against the terminal glass. Passengers farther back had children waiting at home, medical appointments, family events, and connections in Los Angeles. Most had done nothing wrong. No, he said. Melissa looked up. Do not punish the passengers for what our company failed to prevent. Something changed in the cabin. Rebecca watched him with quiet respect. Hannah lowered her eyes. Even Robert seemed to breathe for the first time in several minutes. Julian spoke again. Bring in a standby crew if necessary. This aircraft should depart safely, but no one directly involved in this incident should continue working this cabin until a review is complete. Melissa's head snapped toward him. Her voice broke. She looked smaller now. Not because Julian had voiced his, he had not. Because consequences had entered the room. I have worked for this airline for 12 years, she said. Julian looked at her. And how many passengers have you treated this way in 12 years? Melissa froze. The question did not accuse her of every possible wrong. It asked her to look backward. That was worse. For a moment, memories moved across her face. A man in a sweatshirt asked twice for identification. A woman with bread directed away from priority boarding before her pass was checked. An older Latino passenger ignored until his and spoke. Small moments. Quick judgments. Things Melissa had once called experience. Now they looked different. I never meant to hurt anyone, she whispered. Julian's expression softened, but his voice did not release her from responsibility. Impact matters more than intent. Brandon looked away. The sentence reached him, too. He remembered jokes in the galley, smirks shared with senior crew, moments when he had chosen belonging over courage. Amanda stepped forward. I can have a replacement crew here in about 20 minutes. Julian nodded. Robert looked at him. Am I being removed as well? You will remain until relief arrives, Julian said. Then you shall report to operations and provide a full statement. Robert's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yes, sir. Charles shifted again. What happens to us? Julian looked at him with quiet disbelief. To you? Charles cleared his throat. This has been very uncomfortable. Evelyn closed her eyes. Julian leaned slightly toward him. Mr. Whitmore, discomfort is not the same as injustice. Charles looked away. The words lingered. They were simple enough for anyone to understand, yet difficult for many people to accept. Karen turned toward the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. A standby crew is being called. We expect boarding procedures to continue shortly. No one clapped. No one cheered. This was not victory. It was accountability. Julian stood. The movement made Melissa flinch. He noticed. And for the first time, sadness reached his face. Not pity. Sadness. She still saw consequences as an attack. She yet understand they were the beginning of repair. Julie beneath Seaton off the seat and lifted his carry-on. Hannah rose slightly. Mr. Carter. He turned. I posted the video, she said. It is spreading. Sophia's voice sharpened through the phone. We are tracking it. Looked at Hannah. Did you post it to shame them? Hannah swallowed no. I posted it to show what happened. Julian nodded. Then, keep it honest. I will. Truth mattered. But truth twisted into entertainment could become another kind of cruelty. At the aircraft door, Julian stopped and looked back. At Melissa, at Brandon, at Robert, at Charles and Evelyn, at Rebecca, at Hannah, at every passenger who had watched dignity become negotiable. This company will answer for what happened here, he said. His voice was quiet, but so will the culture that made it feel normal. Then he stepped into the jet bridge. Behind him, the cabin remained silent. The jet bridge felt colder than the cabin. Julian walked through it without looking back. Amanda stayed half a step behind him, close enough to guide, not close enough to lead. She understood now that the difference mattered. At the gate, a small crowd had already formed. Passengers from nearby flights stood beneath the departure screens, phones held low against their chests. Some pretended to check messages, others made no effort to hide their interest. The video was spreading. Julian could feel it in the way people looked at him, not with the usual quick judgment, with recognition. He had spent years becoming known for quarterly growth, labor negotiations, Resemblance, and recovery plans. Now strangers knew him because he had been told he did not belong in a seat he had purchased. The irony cut deeper than he expected. Sophia remained on the phone. Conference room B is ready, she said. The board chair is online, legal is joining now. Human resources and operations are already there. How many views? A brief pause. More than 50,000. It is climbing fast, Amanda inhaled sharply. Julian did not react. Pain always seemed to move faster when it fit inside a short video. They crossed the public gate area and entered a side court marked for airline employees. The noise softened behind them. Rolling suitcases faded. Fluorescent lights hummed above closed office doors. A framed company poster hung on the wall. Respect every passenger. The image showed a smiling flight attendant helping an elderly woman place a bag in the overhead bin. Julian stopped. Amanda stopped with him. He stared at the words. I pass that sign every morning, Amanda said quietly. Julian looked at her. Has it changed how people are treated? Her eyes dropped. No, it was the first answer she had given him that did not try to protect the company. Julian nodded. Then, it is decoration, they continued down the hall. Conference room B had no windows. A long table filled the center. A pitcher of water sat untouched beside a row of paper cups. On the wall screen, faces appeared one by one. William Hart, board chair. Denise Porter, general counsel. Alan Price, chief operating officer. Monica Lewis, head of human resources. All of them looked serious. All of them looked alarmed. Julian had seen alarm in executives before. It often arrived when consequences became visible. It did not always mean they understood the harm. He sat at the head of the table. Amanda remained near the door. William spoke first. Julian, we are deeply concerned. Julian placed his boarding pass on the table. About what? The screen went still. William blinked. About what happened, of course. Be specific. Denise adjusted her glasses. We have a developing legal and public relations issues. No one spoke. The boarding pass looked small beneath the bright conference lights. A thin piece of paper, a seat number, too small to carry what has happened. This is not first a public relations issue, Julian said. It is not first an issue. He looked at every face on the screen. It is first a human issue. Monica leaned closer to her camera. We agree, do we? Her expression tightened. Julian rested one hand beside the boarding pass. I was questioned before I was heard. My valid ticket was treated like a trick. My calm was treated like defiance. A white passenger's preference was treated like policy. Amanda looked down. Julian continued, and this only became urgent when someone recognized my name. The room absorbed that sentence, slowly, painfully. Alan rubbed his forehead. We need to determine whether this was an isolated breakdown. No. The word was immediate. Alan looked up. Julian's eyes sharpened. Do not call it isolated because that makes everyone comfortable. He leaned forward. Pull the last 3 years of complaints involving premium cabin access, seat reassignment, appearance-based assumptions, and unequal treatment. Monica began typing. I want patterns, Julian said. Not excuses. Denise shifted in her chair. We should be careful with language until the review is complete. Julian turned toward her image on the screen. Careful language has protected this company from truth long enough. Silence filled the room. Sophia's voice came through the phone. Hannah Reed posted a second clip. It shows Officer Hayes confirming the ticket was valid. William closed his eyes. Alan whispered something off camera. Julian stood. No one attacks that passenger. Monica stopped typing. No one questions her motives, Julian continued. No one leaks anything about her past. No one calls her unstable, opportunistic, or confused. Denise looked up. Julian's voice grew harder. She documented what our own systems failed to correct. Understood, Monica said. Julian walked to the far end of the turn back. The public will ask what we are going to do. His hand closed around the boarding pass. Not what we regret, not what we deny, what we are going to do. He looked at William, Melissa. Grant and Brandon Cole are suspended pending investigation. William nodded. Captain Hayes is removed from duty until review. Alan's face tightened, but he did not object. Every crew member on that aircraft gives a statement today. Julian looked toward Amanda. Preserve the manifest, radio calls, internal messages, gate records, and crew notes. Amanda nodded, already in progress, and by tonight, Julian said, I want a real training plan. Monica glanced up. We have annual bias modules. Julian's expression changed. A video is not training. The sentence landed flat and hard. I want live instruction, case review, accountability, supervisors in the room, follow-up testing. He set the boarding pass back on the table. People do not need luxury to deserve respect. No one moved. They only need to be people. For the first time since Julian had entered the room, no one tried to interrupt him. By late afternoon, the video had left the airport. It moved through phones in living rooms, office break rooms, church group chats, and retirement communities. People watched with coffee cooling beside them and lunch left untouched. Some saw a chief executive being mistreated. Others saw something older. A quiet-tent black man forced to prove he belonged while everyone around him treated suspicion, sense, and stress. At Horizon Crest headquarters, the crisis room filled quickly. No one called it that, but everyone knew what it was. A long glass table, half-empty coffins buzzing, Clabble newsmans playing silently on the wall. The same headline appeared again and again. Horizon Crest CEO confronted in first-class seating incident. Sophia stood near the screen with her sleeves pushed up. Her voice was steady, but the strain showed around her eyes. Mentions have passed 800,000. Local stations are requesting interviews. 2 national networks want a statement before the evening broadcast. William Hart rubbed both hands over his face. We need to get ahead of this. Julian sat at the far end of the table, still wearing the same jacket from the flight. He had not gone home. He had not eaten. His boarding pass rested beside his phone. This is not something we get ahead of, he said. William looked at him. This is something we stand inside and answer for. Denise folded her hands. We still need to protect the company from premature admissions. Julian turned toward her. A valid ticket was ignored. A paying passenger was pressured to surrender his seat because another passenger preferred it. Security was called. His voice remained controlled. That passenger happened to be me. Which part still requires enough uncertainty to hide behind? Denise looked down. No one rescued her. The conference room door opened. Monica entered carrying a thick folder against her chest. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from reading. Julian sat forward. What did you find? Monica remained standing. In the last 3 years since we received 17 complaints involving premium cabin access, forced seat changes, repeated identity checks, or passengers reporting that they were questions of appearance. The room went still. Sophia closed her eyes. Alan whispered, My God. Monica opened the folder. A black physician was asked to show identification 3 times after boarding first class. She turned a page. A retired Army veteran was told his upgrade was probably a system mistake. Another page. A Latina grandmother was moved from a bulkhead seat after a frequent flyer complained. Her voice tightened. A young man in a hoodie was asked whether he was traveling with someone else. Someone else. She could not finish the thought, so Monica stopped. Someone who looked like they belonged. Julian stood slowly. The chair rolled back with a low scrape. 117 people told us they were hurt. His voice changed. The calm remained, but entered it now. We filed sent travel credits. We sent travel the complaints. We closed cases. We called it customer service. William nodded. It means we failed. Julian looked at him. No. The word was quiet. It means they trusted us enough to tell the truth. And we taught them that telling the truth would change nothing. That landed harder than anger, because it was grief. Sophia's phone buzzed. She read the message and looked toward Julian. Hannah Reed's family says she is being attacked online. Some people are calling her a liar. Others say she posted the video for attention. Julian's jaw tightened. Put out a statement now. Sophia opened her laptop. We thank the passengers who documented the incident, Julian said. We ask the public not to harass any witness, employee, or customer involved. Denise looked up. Julian continued. Accountability is our response. It is not permission for cruelty. Sophia typed every word. That is strong, Denise said. It should be. Julian walked toward the window. Evening had settled over Chicago. Aircraft lifted into an orange sky one after another, carrying strangers who trusted people they had never met with their safety. He watched one plane climb. We move people through the sky, he said. That should make us humble. No one spoke, not superior. Behind him, Monica wiped one cheek. Alan closed his laptop. William stared at the folder of complaints as if each page had become a person sitting across from him. Julian turned back. Tomorrow morning, I will speak publicly. William looked easy through a prepared statement. No, a controlled interview. No. Julian picked up the file. Sir, I will stand in front of the cameras and say what happened. Denise leaned forward. We should carefully review every phrase. You can review the facts. Julian's voice hardened. You will not remove the truth. The room fell silent again. Sophia looked at him. What else do you want announced? Julian walked back to the table. An independent review of cabin service practices. Monica began writing. Live bias and de-escalation training for every customer-facing employee. Not a video, not a checkbox. Alan nodded slowly. A new reporting office, Julian continued, separate from regular customer service. It will have authority to reopen complaints, investigate patterns, and report directly to leadership. William looked at the folder. And the 117 cases? We contact every person. Monica looked up. All of them? All of them. Julian rested his hand on the folder. We listen without defending ourselves. We apologize where harm occurred. We reopen cases where necessary. He paused. And we do not offer vouchers as a substitute for dignity. The room absorbed the instruction. It would be expensive. It would be uncomfortable. It would take time. That was exactly why it mattered. Julian looked towards the silent television screen, where his own face appeared beneath the headline. A man in seat 2A calm, cornered, still refusing to disappear. Tomorrow, he said, we stop protecting the image of the company. His eyes moved across every person in the room. We start protecting the people who trusted it. The next morning, Julian stood behind a wooden podium at Horizon Crest headquarters. There was no music, no polished videos, no smiling banner promising a better future, only the company logo, a row of cameras, and the low murmur of reporters waiting for words that could either begin healing or deepen the wound. Sophia stood near the side wall with a folder pressed against her chest. Amanda sat in the second row, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Rebecca Hayes had been invited as a witness, not as decoration. Hannah Reed sat near the aisle. She looked different from the woman who had raised her phone inside the cabin, not older in years, older in weight. The video had changed her life overnight. Strangers had praised her, others had threatened her. Some called her brave, some called her a sire. She had barely slept. Julian noticed the tension in her shoulders before he stepped towards the microphone. The room quieted. He looked at the cameras. Then he looked down at the boarding pass resting on the podium. Seat 2A, the same small piece of paper that had been treated like evidence of fraud before anyone bothered to read it. This began with a seat, Julian said. But it was never only about a seat. Camera shutters clicked. He did not blink. Yesterday, I boarded one of our flights as a paying passenger. I was questioned. I was doubted. I was pressured to leave a seat that was legally and properly mine. His hands rested against the sides of happened to me. He paused. More important, it should not have happened to anyone. Sophia lowered her eyes. She had heard Julian speak to investors, government committees, union leaders, and thousands of employees. He was always measured, always prepared. This was different. He was not performing strength. He was carrying pain without hiding it. I was treated differently before anyone knew my title, Julian continued. That is the part we must not ignore. The room remained still. If respect arrives only after power is revealed, then it was never respect. His voice sharpened. It was fear. Several reporters stopped typing. Julian opened the folder beside him. In the last 3 years, Horizon Crest received 117 complaints involving appearance-based assumptions, premium cabin access, forced seating changes, and unequal treatment. A murmur moved through the room. We failed to see the pattern. His voice slowed. We failed to listen deeply enough. He looked directly into the cameras. For that, item sauce. No legal language. No distance. No passive wording. I am sorry to every passenger who was made to feel small in a place where they had every right to be. Amanda pressed one hand against her mouth. So I am sorry to every person who showed a valid ticket and was still forced to prove their worth. Julian looked down at the boarding pass. I am sorry that our systems protected comfort before dignity. William Hart sat near the front. He stared at the floor. He had spent most of the night reading complaints. Names. Dates, short messages from people who had not asked for money. They had asked to be believed. Julian lifted his head. Effective immediately, Horizon Crest is launching an independent review of cabin service practices. Pensons moved again. The employees involved in yesterday's incident have been removed from duty pending investigation. His tone remained firm. Every customer-facing employee will complete live training in bias recognition, de-escalation, and respectful decision-making. He paused. Not a video. A few faces shifted, not a checkbox. His hand tightened around the edge of the podium. Real training, led by qualified instructors. With real cases, real discussion, real accountability. The words landed one by one. We are also creating a passenger dignity office. A reporter raised her head. This office will operate separately from standard customer service. It will have authority to reopen complaints, identify patterns, recommend discipline, and report directly to executive leadership. The room stirred. This was not the usual corporate apology. This had structure. This had consequences. Julian turned slightly toward Hannah. I also want to thank the passengers who documented what happened honestly. Hannah's eyes filled. Truth is not cruelty, Julian said. Truth is light. He faced the cameras again. And light gives people a chance to repair what pride tried to hide. Hannah pressed her lips together. Julian looked toward Rebecca, and I want to recognize those who slowed the situation down long enough for the facts to be seen. Rebecca nodded once. She knew the praise was not complete absolution. She had arrived late. She had entered with one hand near her belt, but she had checked the documents. She had asked questions. In a moment built on assumption, she had made room for evidence. Julian returned his attention to the room. I cannot undo what happened in seat 2. His voice softened. I cannot erase the humiliation. I cannot pretend the public discovery of my title repaired the harm. He touched the boarding pass with 2 fingers, but I can decide what that moment becomes. The room held its breath. It will not become a cover-up. His voice rose. It will not become a legal paragraph. Stronger now. It will not become another complaint, placed in a folder and forgotten. He looked into the nearest camera. It will become a turning point. The silence was complete. Julian let the moment breathe. Then he spoke more slowly. People do not earn dignity by dressing a certain way. They do not earn it by flying a certain class. They do not earn it by carrying a title. His eyes moved across the room. They are born with it. Sophia's grip tightened around the folder. Julian stepped back from the podium, then leaned toward the microphone one final time. First, our job is to honor it. Then Hannah no one moved. Then Hannah so stood, not to applaud, to be seen. Others rose slowly around her. Rebecca, Amanda, several employees. Then reporters. The room did not erupt. It changed. Quietly, like people recognizing that an apology meant nothing unless it became action. Julian looked once more at the boarding pass. Yesterday, it had been used to question whether he belonged. Today, it was belongings that belong should never have required permission. 3 weeks later, the final investigation report arrived on Julian Carter's desk. It was 400 pages long, interviews, radio logs, passenger statements, crew messages, complaint records, training documents, internal emails. The truth was no longer a matter of opinion. Melissa Grant had seen Julian's valid seat assignment before she called security. Brandon Cole had heard her acknowledge it. Captain Robert Hayes had been told the ticket was valid before he asked Julian to compromise. And Charles Whitmore's request had never been an official seat reassignment. It was a preference, nothing more. The report also confirmed something worse. Melissa had handled 6 earlier complaints involving passengers who said they were questioned because of their appearance. In each case, the complaint had been closed with a travel credit and no formal review. Brandon had participated in 2 of those flights. Robert had signed off on one report without interviewing the passenger. The harm had not begun in Seat 2A. Seat 2A had simply made it impossible to ignore. Julian sat alone in his office as evening light stretched across the floor. Planes moved beyond the windows, rising over Chicago in slow silver arcs. Sophia stood near the door. "The board is ready," she said. Julian closed the report. "So am I." The meeting lasted less than an hour. There was no shouting, no dramatic display, just facts. Melissa Grant's employment was terminated for knowingly misrepresenting a passenger's status, escalating a non-safety dispute, and failing to follow verification procedures. Brandon Cole was terminated for supporting the false report and for conduct uncovered during the wider review. Captain Robert Hayes accepted a 6-month suspension without pay, followed by mandatory retraining and a final performance review. The investigators found that he had not created the bias, but he had allowed authority and schedule pressure to replace judgment. Charles Whitmore was informed that his elite status did not provide control over assigned seating. His account remained active, but all informal accommodation notes were removed. Horizon Crest also ended the practice of allowing customer preferences to appear beside operational seat assignments. The company did not announce personal details beyond what the law and privacy rules allowed. Julian refused to turn accountability into public spectacle. Consequences mattered. Humiliation did not heal humiliation. That distinction became part of every decision. The 117 past complainants were contacted individually. Some refused to speak. Some cried. Some were angry. A few said they had waited years for someone to admit they had not imagined what happened. One retired teacher told the review team, "I did not want money. I wanted someone to believe me." Julian read that sentence twice. Then he placed it at the top of the new training manual. 6 months later, the Passenger Dignity Office released its first public report. Complaints were no longer buried inside general customer service numbers. They were tracked by pattern, race, age, disability, clothing, language, cabin access, seat disputes, crew escalation. Supervisors were required to explain decisions in writing. Passengers could request independent review. Employees who raised concerns about coworkers were protected from retaliation. Training moved out of computer modules and into classrooms. Real people told real stories. Flight attendants listened to passengers describe what it felt like to be doubted before speaking. Captains studied cases where legal authority had been used correctly, and cases where it had been used as cover for convenience. Some employees resisted. Others changed, not all at once, not perfectly, but measurably. Complaints involving premium cabin access dropped by more than half during the first year. Early intervention reports increased, which Julian considered a good sign. It meant employees were noticing problems before passengers had to beg for help. Hannah Reed received no payment from the airline. She refused it. Instead, she accepted Julian's invitation to serve on the Passenger Dignity Advisory Council. At the first meeting, she sat beside former passengers, disability advocates, retired crew members, and civil rights attorneys. She still carried the same phone she had used on the flight, but she rarely spoke about the video. When people called her a hero, she shook her head. "I was late," she would say. "I just decided not to stay silent." Rebecca Hayes returned to the airport after completing her statement. She later helped build a joint training program between airport security and airline staff. Her lesson was simple. A uniform should slow a situational flow long and not for facts to arrive, not speed it toward force. On his first flight back, he stood before the German briefing. Was Marcus. He stood before the crew during the briefing. "I once believed supporting my crew meant accepting their version first," he said. "I was wrong. Supporting people also means stopping them before a mistake does harm." The room was quiet. He did not ask for forgiveness. He practiced change. That mattered more. 1 year after the incident, Julian boarded another Horizon Crest flight from Chicago to Los Angeles. No cameras waited. He wore the same dark jacket, the same plain jeans, the same worn leather shoes. The same warner. His boarding pass read Seat 2A. A young flight attendant greeted him at the door. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Julian paused. She looked nervous. He smiled gently. "Good morning." At his seat, he placed his bag beneath the chair and looked out the window. Across the aisle, an older black woman held up her boarding pass while another passenger apologized for sitting in her place. Before the woman had to ask twice, the flight attendant stepped forward. "Mom, you are correct. This is your assigned seat." Her tone was warm, clear, respectful. The other passenger moved without argument. The woman sat down and let out a breath she had probably been holding for years. Julian watched quietly. No one recognized the moment for what it was. There were no headlines, no applause, no viral video, just a person being believed the first time. Julian turned toward the window as the aircraft began to push back. Seat 2A had once been the place where strangers tried to make him smaller. Now it reminded him that power carried its greatest weight when it protected people who had none to reveal. Justice had not erased what happened. It had given the pain a purpose, and dignity, once defended, had made room for someone else to breathe. If this story stayed with you, remember the choice Hannah made. When you see someone being treated unfairly, you do not need a title to make a difference. Sometimes the first step toward justice is simply refusing to look away.